Okay. All right. Are we ready? Someone tell me where we stopped.
Nehemiah 10.
Nehemiah 11, page 1109.
Okay, so at the beginning of 11, right, Joyce?
Right.
Okay, let me get where we are. So while I'm looking real quick, Amber Woodman, I have a question for you. I'm getting ready to close my offices, so because when I retire, I'm not gonna renew my lease.
You're retiring?
Yeah, I'm actually retiring. Yeah, I don't know when yet, but I'm not renewing my lease in December. So
you're bringing your office home, right?
That's correct. Yeah, but in the meantime, I have some flat files. Some nice, really wooden flat files in that office that belong to me. Is there anything that the church library could use flat files for?
I don't understand what flat files are.
Okay, so a flat file is a file that has real narrow drawers, but they will hold things that are 48 inches by 34 inches, like maps and things like that. Right.
Like a map file?
Like a map file. Can we use one of those at the church?
Right now I've only got 2 sets of maps, and one of them is in our Sunday school.
Okay. All right.
Ron, you may check with the art teacher, the local, like Main Creek, because they use them for their the artwork to dry, or not to dry.
Good idea. Can you send me a name?
I'll find out for you.
Okay. Thank you. That's perfect.
That's a good idea, Dawn.
Yeah, that's a great idea. All check with several schools because I've got like 9 of them. So, okay. All right. So here we go. We're in chapter 11, verse 1. All right. And here we read, page 1009. 1009. Here we go. Now the leaders of the people dwelt in Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9/10 were to dwell in other cities. And the people blessed all the men who willingly offered themselves to dwell in Jerusalem. These are the heads of the province who dwelt in Jerusalem. But in the cities of Judah, everyone dwelt in his own possession in their cities. All right, so I'm not reading all of these names. But look what's happening here. If you recall, when Nehemiah gets the wall rebuilt, then we're in this process of reintroducing the law, going through all the law, and repopulating the city of Jerusalem. If you remember in the discussions that we've had throughout Nehemiah, that the majority of the people had not come back into dwell in Jerusalem. There was still not much dwelling in Jerusalem. They began with rebuilding the houses for the priests to support the temple, and then it appears that now in these verses of Nehemiah cast lots and said that of each of the 12 tribes were going to move people back into Jerusalem. And so these individuals that you would read about in these verses in chapter 11 are the people that from each of those tribes that are moving back into the city of Jerusalem. Okay? The remainder of those individuals will stay within wherever they were dwelling outside of Jerusalem in Judea, though. Okay? And so if you were to go into the detail of all of these individuals, many of the individuals that you read here will be individuals that were either military based at one point. In other words, their family were from the military segment that was exiled into Babylon. All right, so they had some grounding in military, or they had some relationship to the temple. They were singers, or they were the Methuselah that supported the Levites, or they were all of those individuals had a responsibility in making the temple work on a day-to-day basis. So many of those people were included in this list that we read here in the first verses of chapter 11. Okay. Then we get into, if you look at the 4th through the 9th verses, we're into all of the lay leadership that comes back to Jerusalem, and you could work your way through that list and see that these are all prominent members of all the tribes that were exiled out, not only into Babylon, but the other 10 tribes that were exiled out into Assyria. Okay? All right, so we're going to move on to the last couple of verses in 11. Let's see. Let's look at starting in 25, and we read, "And as for the villages with their fields, some of the children of Judah dwelt in Kirjath Arba and its villages, Dibon and its villages, Jekabeel and its villages." It names several villages that these are the places that those individuals that didn't come into Jerusalem are now into. This is where they're staying. Okay, this is where they will ultimately build their homes. All right, and then we pick up in 31. Also, the children of Benjamin dwelt in Michmash, and it lists all the cities. And then ultimately, some of the Judean divisions of the Levites were in Benjamin. So the two major tribes, the Judeans and the Benjamites, that were exiled out of Judah to Babylon, these verses in Nehemiah talk specifically about where they came back from Babylon and where they resided. Okay? All right, so then we pick up in chapter 12. We're going to go through a whole list of individuals that are in the priests and the Levites. So it says, "Now these are the priests and the Levites who came up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua," and it lists them all right? And then it lists all of the houses that they were heads of the priests, and then keeps listing all the way until we get down to verse 27. All right, so what this list talks about are all the priests and the Levites, right, that came back to Jerusalem, but not just. We have to be careful because it is two time periods that they came back. One group came back with the first return, right? So now we're in the second, third, or fourth return really now with Nehemiah, but this list is the groups of all of the priests that have come back during all of these terms and what they're going to do in the city. All right, and you can read that and all their names down until we get to 27. All right, and then we'll pick up in 27. Now, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought out the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and singing, cymbals, stringed instruments, and harps. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the countryside around Jerusalem, from the villages of Netophathites, from the house of Gilgal, and from the fields of Geba and Asmaveth, for the singers had built themselves villages all around Jerusalem. Then the priests and the Levites purified themselves, purified the people, the gates, and the wall. So I brought the leaders of Judah up on the wall, and appointed two large thanksgiving choirs. One went to the right hand on the wall toward the refuse gate, and after them went Hosea and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, Jeremiah, some of the priest's sons with trumpets, Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, the son of Zakur, and the son of Asaph, and his brethren, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God, and Ezra the scribe went before them. By the fountain gate in front of them, they went up the stairs of the city of David on the stairway of the wall, beyond the house of David, as far as the water gate eastward. The other thanksgiving choir went the opposite way, and I was behind them with half of the people on the wall, going past the Tower of Ovens, as far as the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, above the old gate, above the fish gate, the Tower of Hananel, the Tower of the 100, as far as the sheep gate. And they stopped by the gate of the prison. So the two thanksgiving choirs stood in the house of God. Likewise, I and half of the rulers with me, and the priest. And the singers sang loudly with Jezariah the director. Also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced that the joy of Jerusalem was heard afar off. All right, so Harold, you might have missed this, so we'll go back, right? All right, let me see if I can get a better image. Okay, here is the entire wall, all right? So the first group goes which direction? They go this way, right? And they end up at the sheep gate, and the other group goes this way. Here's the Tower of Ovens, right? And they surround, if we look, right? They basically surrounded the temple with these two choirs, okay? All right. Now, so here we have basically the dedication of the city wall, all right? Now, interesting enough, if we were to go back into chapter 7, right, that's when the wall gets finished, and you would think that would be the best place for the dedication. But for whatever reason, they put it here in chapter 12, right? The other interesting thing here that we read is that one half of this group goes with Ezra, and one half of this group goes with Nehemiah. Now, this is only the second time in Nehemiah that we've got the two of them put together, right? Because we never really read about Ezra, and a lot of scholars believe Ezra was actually there 70 years before Nehemiah, right? But here in these verses, we tie both of them together. Keep in mind that originally, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book. They got split into two books, right? So this might be a way of kind of trying to combine them back together, or link them back together, if you will, for the two events that are important to the Jewish people back from Babylon, the rebuilding of the wall and the rebuilding of the temple. All right? Okay. So here's what happens. They come back. Everybody is purified, right? It says the priests purified themselves, right? Then they purified the people. And then we have the two great processions, right? So this is where our choir processes from, right? We get the processions from the beginning of the celebrations. They process down the city walls, right? One to the north, one to the south. And then they have the great celebration. All right. Picking up
Ron, but I had some Psalms in between that, and I kind of got lost.
I'm sorry. Yes, because I skipped over the Psalms. All right.
Yeah, I see that now.
Let me apologize for that. I meant to stop and tell you that. Right. So at the end of verse 30 right? we introduce in our text or in our Bible the 120th through the 134th Psalms, right? We're not going to do the Psalms here today, so read them tonight, right? Because what these Psalms are going to talk about, and the reason I'm not doing them is they are tied in here because the chronological Bible writers have got they want all the scripture to be here, and these Psalms best relate to these types of celebrations in the temple choice, all right? So that's why they put them in here, all right? But we're going to skip over them to stay with the history, if you will, all right? So we're now in, I've gone too far. 31. Okay.
Temple responsibilities.
Okay, so then 1231 is where I started reading. I skipped all of those Psalms, right? And then we're going to pick up in 44, okay? Are we ready? Everybody on track. We're on page 1017. Okay? And here we read in 1017, and at the same time some were appointed over the rooms of the storehouse for offerings, the first fruits and the tithes, to gather into them from the fields of the cities the portions specified by the law for the priests and the Levites. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and Levites who ministered. Both the singers and the gatekeepers kept the charge of their God and the charge of purification, according to the command of David and Solomon his son. For in the days of David and Asaph of old there were chiefs of the singers, and songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. In the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah, all Israel gave the portions for the singers and the gatekeepers, a portion of each for each day. They also consecrated holy things for the Levites, and the Levites consecrated them for the children of Aaron. Okay, if you remember, we had a couple of weeks ago, everybody gathers to relearn the law. And in the process of relearning the law, a good portion of that was how the people of Israel were supposed to take care of the priest, right? So it talked about first fruits. It talked about tithes. It talked about the fact that priests and Levites didn't own anything, that they were taken care of by the rest of the people. And then it also talked about the setting up of the storehouses and the accountability and the collection of all of these tithes and first fruits so that they would be accounted for. And here we read in the end of the 44th chapter of Nehemiah, reinforcement that Nehemiah has established the responsibility of taking care of and collecting all of those first fruits and the tithes and accounting for them and distributing them out to the Levites and the priests so that then they could be used by them, they could be consecrated by them, they could be placed in the temple by them, or they could be used to feed their families by them. All right? Any questions on 12? All right, so now we're going to skip all the Psalms again, 104 through 150. So now we're on page 1028. Okay, and we are in chapter 13, verse 1. Where we read, on that day they read from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people, and in it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever come into the assembly of God, because they had not met the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a blessing, And so it was when they had heard the law that they separated all the mixed multitude from Israel. All right. So we can go back in if you want, and you can go back into the book of Moses and we can find that. So both of these things are going to link us. This is at the ceremony at the wall, all right? This is during, this is during just after the dedication, all right? And let me find my verses, all right? So they went back again and they revisited the law, and as a part of revisiting the law, they decided that from the law they were going to exclude all foreigners and anyone that was of mixed descent from the temple. All right? Okay, now remember, we had already dealt with in the book of Ezra mixed marriages. And if you recall, there was a list of all of the individuals who disavowed their marriages and divorced their foreign wives at the end of Ezra. Now, in Nehemiah, it doesn't say anything about that. What it does is it goes back to Exodus, into the 12th chapter in the 38th verse, right? It goes back and it looks at Deuteronomy, the 23rd chapter. It's in the 3rd and 6th verses where the Moabites and the Ammonites were permanently, and as it says in Deuteronomy, to the 10th generation from participating in worship with the Israelites. Right? Now, that is based on, right, and we could go back and look at the story, it's based on the fact that those two groups of people were not hospitable to Israel when they were in the wilderness. So during the wilderness period, they hired a Balaam to curse them. And if you remember that, he was hired by Balak, right, to curse them, and so God turned against them. Now they're going back to those same verses, right, and they're saying that they can't come here either. Now the interesting part of that is, as it relates to what's going on at the current time, dedication of the wall in the period of Nehemiah, all right, is that Tobiah, all right, do you remember Tobiah was a satrap that caused a lot of trouble for Nehemiah with Artaxerxes, all right? Tobiah was an Ammonite, all right? And so this is kind of Nehemiah's way of coming back at Tobiah, because what he basically is doing is he's expelling him from Jerusalem, right? So this is Nehemiah saying to Tobiah and Sanballat, the two guys that were giving him trouble, you can't come here anymore, because that's what our scripture tells us. That's what our law tells us. Ammonites to the 10th generation can't come into Jerusalem. All right? So,
Ron?
yes.
What would this mean to Ruth's family?
That's interesting, Vicki. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that, right? Because they're Moabites, right? And
but she had a kinsman redeemer marry her.
Yeah, I know. And so
does that make her and her family?
I don't know. Let me do some research and get an answer for you, or try to get an answer for you. Okay?
Okay.
I'll write that down, because I'm not sure of the answer, but I'll check. Okay. All right. Picking up in verse 4. Now before this, Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storms of the house of God, was allied with Tobiah. Remember? So Nehemiah had some problems because he had all of these people that were back from Babylon that had made alliances with the satrap, and so they reported all Nehemiah was doing, and that caused a lot of problems. So we're picking back up on that story. And he prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priest. But during all this I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. All right, so we're reading here that Nehemiah had gone back, and this is what was going on while he was gone. All right. Then after certain days, I obtained leave from the king, came to Jerusalem, discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. So keep in mind, he had been told he couldn't be there, and yet they prepared a room for him so he could stay. And Nehemiah says, and it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. And then I commanded them to cleanse the rooms, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God with the grain offering and the frankincense. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them. For each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse. And I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah, the priest of Zadok, the scribe, and the Levites. And next to them was Hanan, the son of Zakur, the son of Mathaniah. For they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute it to their brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God and his services. All right, so Nehemiah has gone away back to Babylon. All right, and while he was there, they fell apart. Right? It doesn't take long, does it? We just had this ceremony where we dedicated the wall, we reread the law, everybody said, we'll do that, we'll do everything we're supposed to do. Then Nehemiah leaves, and as soon as he leaves, what happens? What happens is they go back to their old ways. It doesn't take long for them to get back to their old ways. Nehemiah comes back, all right? And when he comes back, he finds that number one, they had let Tobiah stay in Jerusalem. Number two, they had given him a room that was supposed to be the storeroom for all of the things for the temple. Number three, they hadn't given what would belong to the Levites back to the Levites, because the Levites had all gone back to their own towns. They were no longer in Jerusalem. If you recall in the verses that we studied before in 12, they didn't all come back and repopulate Jerusalem because there wasn't room for them there. And so most of the singers and the servants were still living outside of the Temple Mount. Right? And because they were living outside of the Temple Mount, the people in charge of the storerooms weren't sending them their food. So Nehemiah comes back. He gets everything straight. And in verse 14 he says, remember me, O my God, concerning this, and don't forget all of the good things I've done, just because while I was gone, all of the people here did all the bad things that they shouldn't have done. All right? So picking up in 15, in those days I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves, loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Okay? So, while Nehemiah was gone back to Babylon, somebody got rid of the blue laws. They started going to the store on Sunday, right? They started working on Sunday. They decided that commerce took precedent over a day of rest, right? All of those things were against the law, right? And so he goes on in 16. The men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of good, sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. And then I continued with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil thing is this that you do by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath. He reminds them, right? Don't you remember why we got to Babylon? And don't you remember what we promised when we came back? That we would adhere to the law, that we would worship in the temple, we'd do all those things, and yet it doesn't take you very long to turn away from all of those. So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to be dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not be opened till after the Sabbath. And then I posted some of my servants at the gates so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Right? So how does Nehemiah react to finding? He says, I'll solve this. Right? I will close the gates before the Sabbath and not allow them to reopen until after the Sabbath. And that way no one can bring goods in to sell on the Sabbath. Right? So, a little bit like what we do here, right? If you can't get people to do what they're supposed to do, you write a law that makes them accountable for doing what they're not supposed to do, right? Isn't that what he did? I'll try to fix it by closing the gates. I remember Amber, and you'll remember when we were on our trip to Jerusalem, and we were coming back into the hotel one night, and we were in the parking lot in the bus, and all these people driving by screaming at the bus driver because he was blocking their way in, and they were trying to get into their house before the Sabbath started. You remember that?
I definitely do. And I remember the elevator, too, because some of them, you can't cook. And, you know, if you don't have a servant that's a Gentile, they come to the hotels and stay there, so they dedicate one elevator. Do you remember that, Ron?
I do.
That you do not have to push a button on. It comes to every floor and then goes down every floor, then goes up every floor. And if you got on that elevator, you were on it for a while.
That's correct. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So here's Nehemiah. He's trying to set up the same kind of things in order to honor the Sabbath. All right. Now, picking up in verse 20. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. And then I warned them and said to them, why do you spend the night around the wall? And if you do so again, I will lay hands on you. And from that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. All right, so Nehemiah closes the gates, right? And he blocks entry into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. But all of these merchants, they say, well, that's fine, right? I just won't go inside the city to sell my stuff. I'll just come park by the gate, right? So it's like going to Herman Park and going to all the food trucks, right? They're all parked. Can you picture that, right? All the food trucks are parked outside of all of the gates of Jerusalem. And so everybody that lives outside the city says, oh, well, good. I don't have to worry about it. I'm on the outside. I'll go to my merchants and I'll buy whatever I want. I can still buy it on the Sabbath because they're still here. And Nehemiah then goes to the merchants and says, if you come back and keep doing this, then I will lay hands on you. Picking up in 22, and I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. So once again, a little bit of Nehemiah's self-serving, right? Just don't forget, God, I'm the one that helped try to bring us back into in alignment with worship on the Sabbath and no work on the Sabbath. 23rd verse, right? Am I still going? Oh, let's see. That's 20. Okay, so 23. All right, we have a psalm in between. All right, we're going to skip that psalm, Psalm 92. Then we're going to pick up in verse 23. All right. In those days, I also saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them, and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused him, even him, to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. Therefore I drove him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to a service, and to bring in the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O my God, for good. All right, so let's talk for a minute about it. It appears, right, that so Nehemiah goes back to Babylon. He's rebuilt the temple. He has held off the threats from all of the outsiders, including Persian government officials in Tobiah and Sanballat. He has, if you recall, he built the wall to the top of the gates, and therefore then they came and said, we can't trick him into letting us into the city and take over, because now the city's protected. They tried to draw him out. They tried to trick him into defying and going outside of his capabilities by hiding in the temple, which he couldn't do as a lay person. Right? He gets the wall built. They reinstitute the wall. They celebrate the completion of the wall. They dedicate the wall. The temple is dedicated already. And Nehemiah goes back to Babylon for whatever reason. If you recall, he was the cupbearer of the king, right? So he still had a place in the court of Artaxerxes, and maybe Artaxerxes called him back to Babylon. We don't know why he went back, but he went back. Says in the 32nd year, that means that he was in Jerusalem for 32 years. He goes back. We don't know how long he's back in Babylon, but in these verses we read that he comes back to Jerusalem. And when he gets back to Jerusalem, all of the things that had been instituted, all of the things that they had grappled with and got a hold of and said that we're going to do because we remember what our fathers and our ancestors did that caused us to go into Babylon and be exiled, and God's judgment for all things. We're not going to do those anymore, right? While he's gone, all of that comes back again in full force, right? And so he has to come back. And really the last verses of 13 are about the completion and summary of Nehemiah's reforms and what he has done in order to keep the people of Jerusalem in line with their requirements and their obedience to God, right? So if we were to take that for a moment and just look at today, then you can see how easy it is, right? If we don't continue to stay focused on what we are called to be and how we are called to act and what we are called to do, how easy it is for us to forget what happens when we don't and to get trapped in being the way we shouldn't be, right? These people had all come back to Jerusalem after being 70 years in exile, right? Generations in exile, come back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, rebuild the wall, repopulate the city. So basically undo all of the destruction that Nebuchadnezzar had done to make this Temple Mount once again a thriving city, right? With a God that promised to reside there in the temple, right? And not leave them. If you remember what when Ezekiel travels in his fourth vision, God promises that he will be there in the midst. That's what Leo preached this morning in his message out of Ezekiel, right? It is, I am here. That's the promise. I'm in your midst. And yet, how easy was it for them to forget all of those things that had got them into exile to begin with? How easy. And they were starting to fall back to their old ways, right? So I look around us today, and in particular, when we're separated and spread out all over where we are, where we don't have this personal accountability where we see each other on Sundays and Wednesdays and whatever, right? To say, how are you doing? What are you doing, right? To hold ourselves accountable. I can see how easy it is for us to start to be non-obedient. So we have to be very, very careful that we continue to be, remember what we're called to be, remember who we're called to be, and to hold each other accountable during this time period. All right, so I'm going to stop early today for two reasons. One is we're getting ready to go into Joel. So we're starting a new book, and I don't want to get into it too far before we have to stop. Secondly, I didn't prepare any of Joel, so if we started it, I'd be winging it, and it probably wouldn't be very good anyway. So I thought we were going to end up taking a little bit longer in Nehemiah, but I didn't read all of the names that we had, so that probably would have taken us for the next 15 minutes. So next week we'll pick up in Joel, all right? The first chapter, that'll be on page 1031 of our Bible, all right? Any questions, comments, all right? We've come back now. The temple's rebuilt. The city is rebuilt. Jerusalem is repopulated. What we're going to do for the remainder of our Old Testament study is just look at some more prophets and what they're talking about during this time period. So it's going to be a lot of, we're going to cover the same ground a lot from just different perspectives, from from a different prophetic perspective. All right. Any questions? No questions. Lynn?
I have a question. So is this more or less the end of the history of are we at rest for 500 years before we hear from God again now?
Yes, we are, Vicki. Now we're gonna cover some more prophets that were in the same time period, in our study. But really, once Nehemiah comes back and reforms Jerusalem, then we kind of we're in the intertestamental period, right? So for that period of time.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay, Linda, you want to close us?
Sure. I do have a prayer request. Our grandson, Will Davis, is in the Army. It's been very good for him because it's given him direction, and he's considered a specialist now, and he's one step below sergeant, so he's very, very into it. But he is leaving on the 25th to go to Kuwait for 9 months. Just it's too far away for a grandmother, but and it's kind of scary. So I just, if he's not leaving till the 25th, but I think he might could use a little extra prayer.
Okay.
Who else has a prayer request or a praise?
Please pray for Linda Neubauer. She went in for a colonoscopy this week and came home, and the next day ended up in the hospital for 2 days with colitis. And she is at home resting, but she feels she has been run over by a Mack truck. So please keep her in your prayers.
Okay.
Does Annie have an update on Ben and Mary?
I've been trying to reach them by Mary's phone and have not been able to. I leave messages, but she hasn't called back.
Annie's on. Annie, can you talk?
She must be muted.
Hold on. Annie?
Okay. Mary's still in the rehab, doing fine. Ben was hoping that she might come home this coming week. I don't know. Ben's doing fine. He keeps watching himself, and he's going to stay in the house and hoping that they can both stay in the house. They have somebody to come in and help them clean and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of when she gets back, because Kathy had to go back to work. We'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. All right.
I have. Hello.
Thank you.
Oh, but it's very hard for Mary to answer the phone to both of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello?
Virginia, go ahead.
Remember our financial secretary, Marcia, and her husband, Don? They both have COVID, but Don has other complications, and he's been given lots of blood and the platelets as well. Dawn, do you have anything more recent on that? He was still in the hospital.
He was still in the hospital as of Friday.
Okay. They can't find out where the internal bleeding is.
Okay.
And they keep taking him off blood thinners. So that doesn't help.
No.
Yeah, I talked to Eric Wade last week, and they're doing very well. They're attending. They're trying to get settled in a church, but they're attending online like we are, and they said to tell everybody hello.
Okay.
I put the prayer pages, I sent it to all the people that are on our email list for Sunday school. So if you look in your spam, you might find a Shelby Next attachment for the prayer pages, so you can all read them at home now.
Yeah, I got it.
You're welcome.
Yes, Dawn, I got it. I saw it. We were listed in there. Appreciate it. Also, I have just a prayer request for us that we finally get through all this COVID-19 stuff and get back to normal. And anyway, I'm sorry to hear about others like Marcia and her husband having so many problems. It's just an awful thing. So everybody, wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance, all that. It's real. It's not going away. We need to try to help do that.
Yep.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? I have the Katy School District teachers are going back to work now on Monday. I was there on Friday. There's a lot of people that are worried and concerned about this, and I'm not one of them. I pray Psalm 91 every day. It is a COVID prayer, and I would advise everybody to read that psalm. But many people are worried, so we need to pray for our school districts and their decisions and their children. And also, Max Locato and another pastor in San Antonio is having their big revival today. But you can get online and be a part of that virtually at 7 o'clock and you go to www.praysa.org. We need to pray. We need to pray for revival. We need John Wesley's spirit of evangelism to get out there and preach the word of God to everyone.
She's breaking up.
Yeah.
I have a prayer.
Thanks, Vicki.
Vicki, give the website again, please. The address again.
Yeah, I can't hear her.
Okay.
It is, can you hear me?
Yep.
It is www.praysa.org, and you can sign up there. 7 o'clock tonight and then next Sunday.
Linda, at least everybody, I have a prayer request too. Jerry's finally ready to talk about it. He's been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he goes in for biopsies on Wednesday, so we would appreciate any prayers you could raise up.
Absolutely.
Where's he going, Amber?
That's going to be down at Memorial Herman Katy.
Okay. All right. What time?
9:30 is the biopsy.
Okay. All right. Okay.
But he has to be anesthetized. So
Oh, yeah. So you'll be there at 6, right?
8. They said 8.
Oh, that's
Well,
fine.
I won't be there. They make me,
Yeah.
Linda knows this, they make me let him off and then come back.
Yeah. Okay.
It's killing me.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. Well, thank you for letting us know that.
Would you like that in the prayer pages?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else?
All right. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you've given us this day and you give us your word. That in that word is our guidance. In that word is our strength. Because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word is with God. So in your word, we know is you. We ask that you bring that word into our heart so that it feeds our hands and our feet and our lips so that we can do your work in the world. We ask, Lord, that you answer all of these prayers that we voiced today, all of the ones we didn't. Most importantly, Lord, we ask that your presence come upon each and every one of us, that we go into the world, do your work in all that we do. In your Son, the Christ's name, amen. All right,
Amen.
everybody, have a nice week. Good luck, everyone. We will see you next Sunday.
God bless you.
All righty, bye-bye.